Hey everyone. So in today's lesson, we are going to learn how to create your own Cordyceps infection simulator using React and a little bit of an animation library called Framer Motion. The way this is going to work is you can see we have a bunch of clickers and jewels on the screen. And when I click on a jewel, those clickers are immediately going to swarm the one that I clicked and turn that jewel into another one of the infected. So I can keep clicking on these jewels, and as you can see, the clickers are always going to move exactly to that target and add on to that group of clickers. They're also all going to move at a slightly different pace, so we don't just see a kind of single overlapped clicker blob moving together. In this lesson, you will learn about the useRef hook in React, which we'll use to dynamically position and animate these elements. You'll learn how to use the useState hook in React, which is related to how we render these jewels and the clickers on the screen. And you'll also learn a little bit about how to use callback functions across child and parent components, which is necessary to hook all this logic up together of turning these jewels into additional clickers. Finally, you'll learn a little bit about Framer Motion, which is the animation library used to pretty easily create this smooth transition to the jewel that we click on. So let's get started. So cutting over to our lesson, we have a blank slate here. There's a few different sort of avenues we can approach this from, but the way that I think it makes sense to do this is first, let's figure out how to render the jewels and the clickers on the screen with no sort of click handlers or animations whatsoever. Then we'll figure out how to set up the click handlers on the jewels. And then we'll set up those click handlers so that when you click on a jewel, the zombies or the clicker slash infected should move to that jewel and turn it into another infected. And we still don't need to worry about the animation. It will just essentially teleport to the jewels initially. And from there, we can finally add in the animation. So let's start by rendering the people and the clickers. Well, how are we going to do that? So we have this kind of skeleton container here. It's just a full width and height parent container that has this sort of light green background. And we know that at some point we're going to have an array of infected, and we're also going to have an array of the Joels. And these are going to change, right? We have Joels that turn into infected. So this kind of suggests that there's going to be state in this container, right? We're going to have the state of the people and we're going to have the state of the infected. So we're not going to define the state variables just yet, but let's first just write out what we think this is going to look like. And then we'll fill in the blanks and define what needs to be there for this code to actually compile and for the linter to be happy. So I'm going to render both the people and I'm also going to render the infected. So what would that look like? Well, if we just wanted to render the people or the Joels to start, let's say Joels. I'm going to say people just because saying Joel sounds a little bit awkward and I don't want to do that for however many minutes straight. So we'll have people.map because we know this is going to be an array, right? And each element, we're going to take that person, and what are we going to do? We're going to return a React component, right? And what's that going to look like? Well, it's just going to be a person component, and we'll pass in the data type of that person so we can do some sort of rendering here. And because we're mapping over it, we also have to give each element here a key. This is just pretty standard React stuff. And let's just assume that these people all have an ID, so we can just pass it in like that. So obviously this doesn't compile, right? We haven't defined most of what's here to make this work. So let's start by defining the people. Well, what's that going to look like? Well, we know that this is going to be a state variable on the React component because we are going to be changing this number of people, right? When infected touch the person, they get turned into an infected. So we'll use the use state hook from React to do this. So we have people, set people equal to react.useState. Let's give it an explicit type, and that's going to be an array of people. And let's just say this starts as an empty array, just so we have this work. And now we have our person type that needs to be defined. Let's just define all of our types at the top of this file. So we have type person, and for now, all we really know that this needs to compile is an ID. So let's just give it an ID, right? And for the sake of getting this to compile, let's initialize this with one person. And I'm going to actually give this a number ID, so this is a bit easier to type. Let's just give it an ID of 1, right? So great, we have our state variable, and it's initialized with a single person. And now all that's left is to define this person component. So we have person. I'm going to give it a type, actually. So it's going to be a functional component with person props. And what are these props going to look like? Well, if we go back to our parent container, we actually know this already. It just takes a person, right? So person, and that's just going to be type person that we defined earlier. So we have our component, and now this needs to return something, right? And we can even just have it return, let's just make it return a pretty standard square to start. Let's just give it a background of yellow. Great. So if we save this now, there, you can see that our little square pops up on the screen. But we have a problem here, right? Let's say we wanted 2 people to be initialized on the screen. Well, I could just add another person here. But if I save, they're all just going to stack. There's no kind of variable position here, right? And that's going to be a problem because we know that if we go back to the original lesson, these people are scattered all over the screen, right? They're not really arranged in any sort of pattern. They don't really follow any sort of grid or column structure. So this suggests that we probably need to use some sort of absolute positioning here. So to do this, it's pretty easy. We just have to make sure first that our parent container has a position of relative. This is just CSS, and it does. And then we'll give each of our child components absolute positioning. So that's all I'm doing. I'm giving this person component absolute positioning, right? So now if we save, nothing's going to happen because, well, one thing happened. They're all stacked on top of each other now because by default, their absolute positioning will be in the top left of the parent container. But now we can move these around, right? If we wanted to, I'm going to actually give this an explicit CSS style here to make it a bit clearer what's going on. Say we wanted it to move, I don't know, 10 pixels to the left, right? I can do that, give it 30. And similarly, we can give it a top as well. So now we can kind of move this anywhere we want on the screen, right? And this is eventually how we're going to set up all of these people and these zombies to be able to move dynamically across the screen. So there's still another problem here in that these values are hard-coded, right? We ideally want each person to have its own separate position. So let's pretend that we've modified this person and they have a position that's part of their props, right? If we did that, instead of saying 30 here, we could say person dot position, let's say X, right? Let's say that each person has an X position and a Y position. So we add this prop in. So position.x and then top person.position.y. And now this is complaining because our person prop or the person type in the props here doesn't have a position yet. It only has an ID. So let's give it a position. So that settles this compiler error, this linting error, but now we don't have a position type. So let's define this as well. And notice that I'm actually typing out a lot of these types and things that we want before they actually exist. This is intentional on my part to do more of a sort of design or behavioral driven development. It's more declarative as opposed to just immediately typing in exactly what this is. Like I could technically do this, right? But when you start thinking about it like that, that just overall makes this code less readable. Maybe we will want to reuse this position later on. It just kind of is much less of a headache and easier to read overall if you do it this way. That's my opinion. So we have our type position. This is going to have an X and it's going to have a Y. So that fixes all of these errors. It fixes these linting errors. The problem here is that these people now need a position. So let's just add this in. Let's say the first one has X10, Y10, and the second one has X, let's say 30, Y30. So this all compiles. If I save, there, we have our people separately positioned. So I can change this to pretty much whatever I want in the second one and see the first person is unaffected. So now we have our people rendering great. And we're actually going to do something pretty similar for the zombies or infected clickers, whatever you want to call them. I'm just going to call them zombies for this lesson. Just, it's a little bit easier. Everybody knows what they are, and it'll keep things a little bit clearer. So let's do something pretty similar here that we did with the people. We're going to have another state variable for the zombies. Again, this is a state variable because we know that there will be a variable number of zombies, and if a zombie touches a person, that person will turn into a zombie. So we know that at the very least, we'll be adding zombies to this collection as people are touched. So again, let's just do kind of the exact same thing. We don't need to go through this whole linting process again because now we know that these have variable positions as well. It's going to look pretty similar to the people. So again, I'll have type zombie, ID, and position. And right here, see, we're already reusing this position type. So this saves us needing to copy and paste this X and Y object. So great, this is compiling, and we're just going to do something really similar here. We're also going to map our zombies. So I'm just replacing this here, zombies.map, zombie. We'll have a separate zombie component, zombie.id, and zombie equals zombie. And again, I'm just going to copy and paste, this entire component. I'm just renaming everything here. Nothing too crazy here. And let's distinguish this a bit by giving it a green background. Other than that, this really looks the exact same. So everything's compiling now. If I save, now our zombie renders as well. So this is getting pretty close to what we want. The problem is that these are still hard-coded positions technically, right? I want these to be generated automatically at runtime. And I want these positions to span basically the entire width and height of the parent container. So I can't do this, right? I can resize this window. I might be on a mobile device. I don't actually know what the width and the height is until this page or some kind of user agent renders the screen, right? So this is where the use ref hook in React comes in. So something kind of cool you can do is you can use the ref hook and forward that to any HTML element to be able to access properties of it in your code. So what does that look like? Well, I'm going to create what's called a parent container ref, and that's just using the use ref hook, and we'll initialize this to null. And I'm going to pass that ref to our parent div container. So all of these have this ref prop. You can just add that to anything, and then as long as you pass in the result of this use ref hook, that'll all work properly. And because we're passing this to a div element, I can just add HTML div element as the type there. So now what we want to do is actually set these people and zombies after the page loads. So this isn't going to be hard-coded anymore. We're actually going to initialize both of these to an empty array. And actually, we'll start with that for now and see how that goes. So how are we going to do this? Well, kind of the naive approach would be to immediately run some kind of function that looks in the width and height of this div and then sets the people based on that. So if we did want to do that, then maybe when we're initializing the people here, we would do something like parent container ref dot current dot, oh, sorry, mistyped that, dot current dot client width, something like that, right? But this actually won't work because the first time this component renders, you can see that the ref is null. It's only after the first render cycle that this parent container ref gets associated with this div. And only at that point can we access the client width and client height. So we actually need to treat this as more of a side effect and use the React.use effect hook to accomplish this. So what is this going to look like? Well, these use effect hooks are used to do side effects after the first render cycle. And we know that we want to use this parent container ref width and height to generate these positions. So let's do one quick check. So first, if parent container ref dot current, so if this hasn't been initialized yet, we're not going to do anything. Let's just return. Otherwise, if it has been initialized and this has a value, well, we can figure out what the width and height are of the screen, right? So let's initialize that. So the width is going to be parent container ref dot current dot client width, and the height is going to be parent container ref dot current dot client height. And this is just array destructuring. This width is associated with the first value. This height is the second value. And then what are we going to do? Well, we want to generate some number of people and some number of zombies. So let's assume that we have some constant for how many of each of these we want to define, right? So we'll say, so this is kind of a hack to create an initial array of some size. So let's say we're going to create an array of number of people. And then for each value here, so we don't need to give it a number here, but we might need to use the index. Actually, even then, I think we're good. So let's just see what this looks like. So for each one, we're going to return a person, right? So constant people equals array.map, and we're going to return a person. And I'll even explicitly define the type here, just so we don't accidentally miss adding anything. And we're simply going to return a person. Let's make the ID the index, since we know this is going to be different for every value. And for the position, well, we want to kind of just generate some random position, right? That's based on the width and the height here. So I already, sorry, I didn't. Oh yeah, I have a util to get a random arbitrary number in a specific range. So let's use that here. So get random arbitrary. This is going to be between 0 and the width. And then for the y position, we're going to do the same thing. And this is complaining because it didn't actually import. There we go. And we also need to define the number of people. So let's do that here. Number of people, let's just say 3. And we're also going to have some number of zombies, let's say 4. So now we have our people. So we're just going to do set people to the people. And let's also define our zombies. And I'm actually going to copy paste this entire thing because it's effectively going to look the exact same. The only difference is we have zombies instead of people, right? Zombies, we're going to set our people to the people and set zombies to the zombies. And one last thing we need to do is add the parent container ref to the dependency array here. If we don't do that, this function will only run a single time after the first render, which will be when this is still null. So it's just going to do an early return. It's not actually going to do anything. Okay, so now that we've done that, if I save and reload the page, this should actually update the screen without all of our people and zombies. Great. So as you can see, there are 3 people and 4 zombies, and they all appear at random locations on the screen. And if I keep refreshing, they're always just going to show up at different locations. So this is kind of what we want for the initial state of this screen. So I think this is a good place to stop the first part of the lesson. After this, we'll set up the click handlers so that when you click on any of these people, which are the yellow squares, all of these green squares are just going to move straight to that person. So thanks for watching the first part. I hope you learned something so far. And if you like this channel, please like and subscribe and let me know what you want to see. It helps me out a lot. All right, see you in the next part of the lesson.